Not. I hit it. That's funny. That's funny. We are officially live. There are 0 watchers, so getting your water might not be the worst idea. You want to go grab it? I can just keep everyone
I can talk
entertained.
for 20 minutes without water. It's good.
Okay. Yeah, you're like this Charles. You and Charles are like climbing mountains and doing crazy things all the time, right? So I'm sure a little bit of lack of water is not going to kill you. So Ladek, nice to have you on the show. So tell people maybe just a little bit about message design. Tell them, I guess, who you are, and then happy to dive into kind of your backstory before all this.
Sure, yeah. So message design is a company that solves a couple of problems for physical service providers, local service providers, entrepreneurs, small businesses, essentially anywhere in the world. And we do that by getting them more visible on Google Maps. We do that by automating their calendars. So if you think of everything from a roofer to somebody who cuts hair to anybody who has to set up an appointment and, works with clients, managing the chaos of a calendar is a real pain in the butt. And it's a way that, you lose a lot of business. And then, within that process, we also provide, as you're familiar with, AI tools, bots, and, both voice and chat and whatnot, so that people can be the first to respond to inquiries. So when somebody comes and says, hey, I've got a plumbing problem and it's 6 o'clock at night or it's 10 o'clock at night, and you're out on a job or, somebody's, you're doing something, or maybe you're just not even at your phone. We provide systems that allow you to respond immediately because we know through the research, the data that's out there, that the business that's the first to respond is, leaps and bounds more likely to get that business than not. So that's what I do today. But I come there from a very, very long and circuitous path that, I'm happy to talk about.
So let's go into it. Yeah. And I have a feeling this might be like part 1 of like I don't know, 10-part series, maybe a 3-part series. So, but let's start with your story.
I'm not that interesting, bro.
Okay, maybe 2-part story. So Steven, you studied farm and ranch management at Colorado State, which I imagine surprises a lot of people. Where your career's gone. What drew you to this field originally? Were you actually planning to become a farmer or rancher?
So the answer is yes. I am a college, complete failure in the fact that I went to 4 different colleges, over my career. And then I eventually ended up at Colorado State University. I'm from Colorado originally. It's hard to talk about, a little humble brag there. I finished high school early. So I was in the community college system. I went to Colorado College, dropped out of there. I went to the University of Colorado, Denver. I went to, ended up at CSU. And at the time, ultimately it was a love story. I had a girlfriend who was from Iowa, and we wanted to create a farm where essentially I like to tell people it was going to be a soup farm, because I had this vision that what you could do is you could grow, organically, everything that you'd need for dry soups. You think of like a bean soup, or you think of a tomato soup, or you think of these kinds of things. And then I was going to put it in little, fancy paper bags, and then go sell it to people at Starbucks for $15 a bag. And so that was it. Tied to that, you can start to build community around it, because my passion, as you'll see throughout to all of the things that I've built in my life, is how do you build communities, and how do you do that effectively? And then how do you do that in a way that allows humans to have better interactions and sort of, create a better human space for us in the world. But I put that out there because I think that you've found that I have this degree from Colorado State University, but I wonder if you also found that I have a master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution from American University. And I also have an MBA from Central European University, right? So I'm a well-credentialed individual. But at the end of the day, because of the partner that I have had for, more than 20 years, and the adventure that we've taken across the globe, I've been able to flex and live in my entrepreneurial space. And that's where I live on a day-to-day basis.
Fascinating. I did read about your master's in international peace and conflict resolution, and I was going to ask you. So, one of the questions that's driven you is this idea of like, how do we solve problems between one another without killing each other?
Mhm.
Where did that fire come from? And was there a specific experience that made that question
Oh
sort
yeah,
of personal for you?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, uh, after I got my the farm and ranch degree is essentially an economics degree, right? So after I got that degree, I started, of course, immediately working in the tech field. I actually worked for a what's called the Farmer Software Association in Fort Collins. That got me into the tech world, uh, as a salesperson, as a marketer. Fast forward, a couple of years down the line, this is the late 90s, and so I was able to hop between a few organizations. I ended up in DC, Washington DC, and then eventually was recruited to come and be the director of international recruitment for a tech company up in New Jersey. They were in Freehold. I lived in Hoboken. I'm getting to your question. Because I was an international recruiter, my job was to fly around the world, India, Eastern Europe, the Philippines, other places, and look for high tech workers to bring into the United States on H-1B visas. Right. I woke up and I can remember it still. Here we are. Gosh, this is 25 years later. Clear as day. I woke up in in a hotel in the middle of Bangkok, and basically said, "What am I doing in my life?" Right. I'm basically just uh, I'm basically just sitting around, listening to other people's stories and helping them get jobs and those kinds of things. And I felt like there's a more effective way or a better way that I can contribute to what's going on in the world. And I started asking the people I knew in my network. I asked my aunts and my uncles, like, what does a person do to become an ambassador? Right. Because I thought that was the most effective way to talk about international relations and, be a person who is on the front lines of solving international conflicts. And so that's, through those conversations, it was suggested to me that I go and get a master's degree in some field of politics, right? International relations. I stumbled upon the degree. It's called an IPCR degree at American University. And I went there I graduated from there in 2003. And that's where the adventure started, because that's also in Washington, D.C. is where I met my wife. And that's where we, launched our adventure from DC to the rest of the world.
You then went on to get an MBA, right, from Central European University. Was it in Budapest? So what made you decide you needed, business training on top of your peace and conflict studies?
So essentially, what we know about the world, at least it used to be this way, was that credentials mattered. And so I did my MBA. I'm going to fail on the dates here, but it must have been in like 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. So we need to understand different part of the story is that, so Dana, we'll refer to her a couple of times here. Dana and I met in Washington, D.C. in 2004. We got engaged 7 months later, and we left the United States 9 months after we met, right? So it was kind of one of those love at first sight, and we knew what we were doing, and we were like, yes, let's do this. We had a fun little competition between ourselves to say, hey, look, we knew that we wanted to live overseas, and we said, whoever can get the first contract, to get overseas, we're going to follow that contract, and the other person's going to quit their job in DC and just kind of follow along and figure it out. She got 3 job offers. I got 0. So, it ended up being a beautiful thing for me, because I live in the entrepreneurial space. I'm super comfortable there. And that's a part of our story. I've told this story a whole bunch of other times. You can hear it on other podcasts as well, if you just kind of Google that. But the whole point of that story there is that our first posting was in the country of Jordan, in the Middle East. It's next to Israel. It's next to Lebanon and Iraq and all that kind of stuff. We were working in that environment where I did a lot of my work in Iraq after the second Iraq war, and we were both working in the humanitarian space. And so one of the things about working in the humanitarian aid and international development space is that it's filled with really, really, really smart people. And so credentials matter when you're trying to get more jobs, when you're trying to put yourself out there as a consultant. And so one of the things that I found after when we moved to our second country, which was Hungary. We lived in Budapest. Central European University had this 1-year program. It was super legit, and they offered scholarships to it. And so I said, hey, wow, here's a cool opportunity. I can kind of do it, while still maintaining my business. And so I jumped on the opportunity so that I could, when I submitted a proposal, I can say MBA as well.
Interesting. In 2005, you've been open about the fact that you jumped into consulting. So you founded something called the International Solutions Group. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So
So what was that period like, building a company, while living abroad and working 7 days a week?
Yeah, I got really and I think many people have a similar entrepreneurial story, especially back from the time, in the early 2000s of, I think every entrepreneur has this. As I said, Dana got the contract, so we moved to Jordan, and I had to figure out something to do. And so I started raising my hand and, working my contact network to say, is there anything that people need to have done? And through various contacts, I started getting individual contracts, right? So I worked for an organization, or with an organization called the Iraq Middle Market Development Foundation for a while. I think it was fun, actually, IMMF. And I worked with various United Nations agencies, and I worked, as a subcontractor for some USAID organizations and those kinds of things, filling in gaps where people needed and whatnot. And the short story there is, at one point, I was working for, as I said, the Iraq Middle Market Development Foundation, and the guy who was running that, essentially one day he said, "Hey, Stephen, you do great work. I really like, what do I got to do to make you a employee? I want you here full time," and everything like that. And for some reason, I looked him in the eye and I said, "David, what do you think about me hiring somebody else to be here full time? And, sort of continue to build out the staff here. And, while I'm, I'll manage that person, I'll pay for their insurance. I'll do their travel. I'll do all those kinds of things." And I think I got lucky in that there was a confluence of different things, and that it was easier for that contract to happen because there was no HR involved or anything like that. You could just, it's a contract between two businesses. But that's how International Solutions Group was born. I was operating under that umbrella name by myself for, a couple of years, but then that's how I hired my first consultant. And then I hired my second one and third one and fourth one and fifth one. And we started to grow that company. Eventually, about 2 years later, we won our first big contract in Jordan, doing a large evaluation for the government of Jordan. And then, things kind of took off from there. We ended up having, there was an economic cycle that happened right around that time. The financial crisis hit in 2007, and then it trickled into the contracting world in 2008-9. So contracts kind of stopped. That's where the MBA happened, because I was then in Budapest. So our business shrunk. But then, I stumbled upon, I knew that I wanted to still do this, right? I had the bug. We were successful. I had built the business. I knew how to hire people and contract them and bring them in. And I was just looking for, how do we take that next step? And that's where I ran into, in Budapest, the person who ended up becoming, my partner in that venture. His name is Michael Klein. And we started out, with a handshake agreement saying, "Hey, let's do this." And we ended up building that company, like I said, more than 7 figures a year. And then we sold it in 2019. And so, yeah, that was a great run, but there's lots of details there. So you tell me where you want to go with that.
So what did it feel like to let go of a company you built from scratch? What did that exit teach you about yourself as an entrepreneur?
I have suffered for the last 6 years, every day since I sold that company, right? Until this year.
Yeah.
Until this year. And I've started to learn, but because one of the things that is talked about a lot, I think now, is that when you wrap yourself in as an entrepreneur into an organization or into a new company and you build it, it not only becomes your baby, but it becomes a huge piece of your identity. And so when you let that go and you make the choice to have a sale event or an exit event of some kind, there's very little talk around losing your identity. And so for the longest time, I was that international man of mystery. I got to get on an airplane, every 4 to 6 weeks, and I would go to some new country. I mean, I've worked in like something like, 40 different countries. I visited something, 80 different countries, it's, and so I had that, and I had staff. I mean, we had 50 consultants working for us at any one time, at the peak. And so to go from that to then, working for the acquirer as an employee for a couple of years, and then ultimately say, hey, look, I'm not interested in being an employee, and sort of going off on my own, reinventing yourself that's a tough one. It's a tough one. And happily I've now gone through that gauntlet and whatnot, but making the decision to sell, I think that was your first question, was, all of the stars aligned. I mean, I'm the first to admit out there, like, it wasn't a huge windfall for me. Like, I didn't get some, 10-figure check. We got financial compensation for it, and it was a good move in that regard. But, if Dana were sitting here right now, I sat down with her the week before we were supposed to sign the documents, and I said, look, I'm not sure if this is the right move. I'm feeling weird about it, and this is the reason why she's my partner, is that, we went through a process of saying, look, what are the reasons for doing this? And we saw, look, all of my employees are going to get, a 25% salary raise immediately. They're all going to get benefits that they didn't have before. It's going to be a jump into a bigger brand that will go places. And, so that remind me to tell you like a side story there. And so when you look down the criteria of the 100 different reasons why you would sell, 99 of them were there. And that one where it's like, hey, I'm not getting a 10-figure check was the one that wasn't there. And I'm like, look, this all makes sense for everyone. Like, I have this, we get the story of selling a great company that we built. Everybody that I work with and love and care for and want to see succeed, they're all going to be, lifted up really, pretty dramatically. Everybody gets to grow their careers. Everyone wins. And that's just the kind of person I am, I guess, so that made the most sense. And so that's, and at the end of the day, it was time to move on. It was time to pivot. And did I have any way of knowing that, 10 months ago, that the Trump administration was going to kill USAID, which was a huge, source of income and revenue for us? No, I had no idea. Right. But the fact that I pivoted out of that sector, right, there you go. That was a great decision. Obviously, hindsight is 2020, right? But there you go.
I mean, we only have a few minutes left, so like I said, we're probably gonna have to do a part 2 to do it some serious justice. But take us into how you're taking all these learnings and experiences and just pummeling it into your next project, message design.
Sure. So here's the quick thing. So after we sold ISG, I pivoted into the online learning world. In the online learning world, I got lucky. I looked like a genius for 10 seconds because one of my side hustles that I purchased in 2015 was a website called Moodle News. Moodle News was essentially just a blog that was founded by another guy named Joe Tebow. And he talked about the world's largest learning management system called Moodle, right? It's an open source learning management system. And long story short, Martin Duguiamas called me one day and said, hey, Steven, you can't use the Moodle name anymore. And I said, why not, Martin? He's like, because, we're consolidating, we got some investment, blah, blah, blah. So I had to change the name of the company, and I had to change it. And so we had to have a reason to change it for our audience. So I created a virtual event. It talked about how do you do online learning. And I created that virtual event in December of 2019, just before the world announced that the COVID crisis hit. So I got really, really lucky that I had an online event about, how to do online learning with 30, literally like rock star guests ready to go in February, or it was like March of 2020. And so that blew out of the water. That just exploded and was huge. And then we repeated it a second year. Then the company got acquired into a bigger organization, again, a learning management system. And, again, it's just another one of those things where, you, as an entrepreneur, I find at least that I'm always testing, like what are the things that are working right now? What's working over there? And I always love to have those side projects because that allows me to see what tech is working now, what HR strategies are working now, what payment systems are possible, When I started ISG, back in 2004, 2005, people didn't even know what managed hosted email was. And we were, like Google Drive and Dropbox, they weren't even a thing. We built our company around Dropbox eventually. And I was using Skype, to run the entire business. And now today, like, it's just, oh wait, of course I can just go plop anywhere and, rock up for, the world's biggest brands. Right. But none of that stuff existed. And so always having your fingers out there to seeing what's working and what's not working is something that's just built into my DNA. And that's, I'm sure I can see our time is kind of coming to a close here. It's like, that's how message design was born out of all of these different pieces along the way. Because you can see that as we automate and as the world becomes faster and faster, I'm betting on a couple of different things. One, I'm betting on that small businesses and entrepreneurs will continue to need the tech in order to compete. So that's why we have calendar automation. That's why we have Google visibility. That's why we have chatbots and whatnot. But I'm betting on the fact that human interaction and human relationships are going to be the differentiator in the future. And I believe that by allowing the tech to do the job of managing that administrative part of your life, but then delivering a service as a plumber, as a roofer, as a consultant, as a whatever, making that your swan song. I think that's where the real future is.
Awesome. Well, let's pause there. Let's maybe double click on that idea if you're free next week. And you're a great storyteller. You seem like you've been living quite an exciting life. And I look forward to working with you as as a partner, and also learning along the way.
I'm gonna drop this little one too. One of the great things I love talking about, and question that both I and my wife get asked all the time is, how do you do this with a family, right? And how do you make this life work with not only a partner, but then we have 3 kids, right? And so we've been doing this now, like I said, since 2005. And most of the people that we talk to from almost anywhere in the world, they just kind of shake their head and like, I don't understand how you guys could possibly do it. But this is normal for us, and we think it's the best life ever. So I'd love to talk about that more.
Yeah, that's another one of my favorite topics, is talking about family and how to, they talk about work-life balance. I think it's more about harmony than it is about balance. And sometimes, 100%. Got to give and take. Cool. Okay, until next time, thank you all for checking in, and thank you, Ladek.
Thanks, man.